Hi, everyone. I'm Samantha G. Wolfe. I'm an emerging tech brand and marketing strategist, adjunct professor at NYU, and an author, keynote speaker. And now I'm a new host of an Internet of Senses podcast focused on sight. So in general, I've been called a sense maker and a translator, and I help people to understand emerging technologies, including VR, AR, AI, virtual beings, avatars, you name it. And I'm so thrilled to be a part of this podcast because I get to interview really cool people like my first guest, who totally and utterly inspires me. Judith is a visionary and a community leader, leading not only her company, but building an Africa-wide ecosystem. She's been a guest in my class, and I was lucky enough to have her be a team member of mine as part of the World Economic Forum Futures Council, and to see her brilliance up close. So I hope everybody who's listening gets to be as inspired as I am by Judith. And welcome to the podcast, by the way. I just read that your company actually means inspiring or inspired. And so I was like, that is so perfect. So please tell everybody a little bit more about you, and we're going to dive into it a lot, but you are one of the most articulate people that I know, so I'm sure you'll do a better job, more justice to your career than I ever would.
Oh, Sam, you're far too kind. And can I say what an absolute pleasure it is to be here with you today on this podcast. Well, I know folks listening, you probably already know how brilliant Sam is. And if you don't, please check out her amazing work, her books, all of that. But yeah, let's dive in. So my name is Judith Okonkwo. I run what I call an XR creation lab called Imisi 3D. And you're right, the word Imisi is a Yoruba word, which means to inspire, literally to breathe into, that sort of thing. The work that we're focused on with that lab is ecosystem development for the immersive technologies across the African continent. It's work we started doing in 2016, and really the name kind of like speaks to what I think, just a little bit of what I think is possible with these technologies, because I've always believed that they will become pervasive for humanity. And I think if we actually, embrace them now intentionally, right, with purpose, then we can make sure they work for us in ways that perhaps other technologies have not in the past. And I certainly wanted that to be true of all people around the world. But then my particular focus was people on the African continent, to make sure that those voices are platformed in the conversation. But I come to technology via, well, not a direct route, I suppose is how I would describe it.
Well, no, this is one of our things that we have. I was a psychology major
Mhm.
undergrad, and then when I saw, and I think that maybe when we had first met, that I was like, oh, business psychology. And so to you
Mhm.
and me, it makes sense, but maybe
Yes.
you can explain to other people how you made that connection from business psychology into emerging
Mhm.
technology.
Yeah, absolutely. So my professional background is as a business psychologist, but I would say that as an individual, right, I've always been extremely curious, particularly about the future. I explained to people that when I was a child, I was like, when I grow up, I'm going to go to the moon on vacation. Like, those were my definite plans and all of that. So I've been really curious. And I say that, as a child, like one of my favorite toys was the Viewmaster, which, if you know what foreshadowing VR headsets, right? So, so I was starting my kidding on it, but really, I think it's the interest in people and humanity that you get from psychology that really connected the dots for me. Because when I thought about what immersive technology may be able to do, and the fact that it wasn't boundaried yet, when I started getting involved. So this was sort of like, 2016, when the questions
Which is
everywhere, the
around
headlines were like,
when I got involved too. So it's
yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
Will this be
absolutely.
the year? Won't this be the year of VR? There were all those
Yep.
headlines and everything. We're like, where are we on the
Yep.
hype cycle?
Absolutely.
And for me, the technologies are happening. The technologies will happen. I don't think there's any way around that. So it was just a question of, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to get involved, right? And that was one element of it, that we be involved in shaping what it will be and defining it for our purposes. But then also, I mean, imagine if sort of like all of the different brilliant minds out there were thinking about how they could apply these technologies to solve some of our grand challenges. What might that look like? And I mean, I'm sure we'll get into it, but there are a number of areas where I'm really passionate about, shifting the needle in terms of what currently obtains. And I think that, these technologies just might help, and I'd like to see that happen.
No, absolutely. I think one of my favorite stories that you've told me is when you're
Mm,
like, I want to start this VR Africa, AR Africa. We're going to do a hackathon, and probably
mhm.
assuming that it would just be Nigerian people being a part of this hackathon, and it wasn't. Can you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
how that evolved?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, starting out the lab, we had sort of like three focus areas. We wanted to evangelize. We wanted people to know what technologies were. We wanted them to know that they exist right now. We wanted to give them their first touch and feel of the technologies. The second key aspect for us was that we wanted to build up a community of practitioners, right? If we don't have the skills to utilize these technologies, then we'll be constantly on the back foot. So, can we build up a community? Can we upskill them? Can we get them to build? And then the final area for us was investing our sort of like time and resources in areas where we thought there was room for immediate significant impact for the technologies for society. And that has been areas like education, healthcare, storytelling, etc. So, going back to that second piece where we were looking at building community and getting people to acquire skills and start to build, we were like, well, what is the one way, we know we can get people building? And I had at the time just spent a little bit of time in the African tech ecosystem, and hackathons really were a thing. So it's like, okay, we're going to do a hackathon. But of course, we knew we were starting from, I mean, I don't know where to, I don't know what level, from nowhere, right? Like, absolutely nowhere. There was no equipment. There were, knowledge, all of that. So we were very fortunate to get sponsorship from, well, Meta, what was Facebook at the time, a brilliant, brilliant gentleman who sort of like was heading some of the developer work, was like, okay, we'll support this. And the goal was we would get have 5 teams in the hackathon for starters. So we'd have like 5 kids. So have 5 VR ready computers, Samsung Gear VRs, 360 cameras, that sort of thing. So we got that. And then we put the call out for participants, right? And it was amazing. I mean, we got over 100 people applying, and some of those applications came from as far afield as Botswana and Southern Africa, Zimbabwe. Like, it was fantastic. And for me, it was so affirming because from the start, I was like, we have to have like a continental outlook, right? We have to think about how we bring the whole continent together, because I think that's how we move forward, faster. And so, yeah, it was great to know that the interest is there. I knew it must be anyway, but to have some evidence and to know that the path is ahead of us, right? We have work to do to make sure we can reach beyond the shores of Nigeria.
So when you say the path, like what was sort of the
Mm,
path? How have you taken that? Like what did
mhm.
from there, where is it gone to?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe I should talk a little bit about how we would run the hackathons. Like I said, because we knew we were starting from, nothing, we knew that we had to provide training for the people that were going to hack. You know what I mean? We weren't saying like, hey, if you got XR experience, come and hack. No, we were like, if you want to do, VR, then come. We'll run training sessions beforehand so you can like upskill yourself. And we had some great mentors from Unity who helped out with that. And then it's like, and then you have, your 48 hours to build and all. And that was the approach that we took. So we always had this element of like, there'd be training, and then there'd be a hackathon, and in later years, a boot camp after that. But that first one, like I said, physical experience just in Nigeria. And then, of course, we were always thinking about how we could go further afield. By the time we got to the next one, we started collaborating with partners across the continent, and we held it in 7 African countries. And then by the time we got to the one after that, the goal was always like, how can we keep expanding? So we planned for 10 African countries. But wouldn't you know it, that third one was happening in 2020, which is, where
Of
it was like,
course. Well,
where
I,
it was
I
just
I
like,
learned quickly because that's when I started teaching at NYU, and people were like,
yeah,
you can never explain VR or AR without actually putting on the headset. And I was like, no, in
yes.
fact, I have taught many students about these technologies without actually putting it on their heads because it
Yeah.
wasn't possible.
Exactly right, exactly right. And so we were like, well, how do we make this work? And a lot of countries, like lockdowns were still on and everything. We didn't know people were going to be able to hack, in the physical spaces.
Right?
So we then like pivoted to a hybrid model. And because we were doing a hybrid hackathon, we were then like, oh, well, let's open it up to the rest of the continent. And so from the previous hackathon, where it was seven, in-person physical events in cities, we went to 10 cities across the continent with physical events, but participation in 28 African countries. And then by the time we had come to sort of like the last one, which was in 22, we had physical events in 16 countries. We had 42 African countries take part. So, it's just, we keep on going. We definitely want to be in every single country on the continent. And really for us, it's how can we make sure that people have access, right? So that they can learn, so that they can start thinking about what they want to do with it, so that they can have an informed voice. Because, right now in the world, there are all these conversations happening around governance, around regulatory issues, around privacy, safety, security, like all of these things where, yes, you can like theorize about what you think you might want, but so much better to have the experience to say, actually, this is what we want for ourselves. This is what we see for the future.
Yeah, no, I think that you always sort of brought it home when we were in those meetings together around just
Hmm.
access and the importance of access and infrastructure.
Hmm.
Can you talk to that in case people aren't necessarily familiar with the African ecosystem and what
Hmm.
first we'll go access infrastructure, but then I want to go into like all the amazing stuff that's being done. So we'll do a
Yeah,
balance of the two.
of course, absolutely. So from an access and infrastructure perspective, I mean, major challenges. We were starting out with VR, and virtual reality, like a major, major challenge on the continent has been around access to the headsets. None of the big tech companies sell their HMDs on the continent. And so what that means is that by the time you actually acquire one, you're shipping it in some way. So Amazon maybe ships to, I don't know. I think the last time I checked, I think it was about just about 5 African countries. I don't know if that's increased since then. So a lot of countries don't have access to Amazon, so you'd have to find some other roundabout route to get a device in. And even if you're shipping via Amazon, however it's coming in, definitely by the time you have the markup for the shipping, the import, like all of that, sometimes you're paying almost double what somebody would pay in New York and London, elsewhere. And I think, I mean, so now I'll speak specifically from the Nigerian perspective. If you consider the purchasing power of the naira, like that is just saying, hey, we're wiping out the majority of the population in terms of access. You would have to be in sort of like this specific segment to be able to engage. So that's one element of it. Alongside that, of course, the sort of like infrastructural issues around connectivity, around access to electricity that still persist. As you can imagine, I mean, if you work in the immersive technology space, you're already probably crazy. Going, what problems with electricity, data? Yeah, you know what an issue that would be. So those definitely exist as well. And then, I mean, one thing the pandemic did do is sort of like open up the world, in a digital sense, so that there's more access to sort of like interaction and engagement globally with other like XR ecosystems. But like previously, things were sort of like really geo-blocked, if you will, to certain parts of the globe. And what that meant was limited access to resources and to learning opportunities. Certainly back in the day, you wouldn't find institutions that were providing learning opportunities for the immersive technology. So if you wanted to learn, I mean, if you talk to like the pioneers in the African XR ecosystem, all of them will be extolling the virtues of the University of YouTube, for example, because really that was how people that
Right.
was how people, set about to acquire the knowledge. And it was really this real determination, right, to aggressively like self-learn that got people going, and you just look for whatever resources, whatever contacts you could make, etc., to build up your knowledge. I mean, things have opened up a little bit now, but it's still, I think it's still sort of like not even kind of like an end note in terms of what it should be. So much more to be done in terms of that. Then, of course, as you can imagine, the issues around funding. I think if you remember, even from 2016, like one of the things people used to talk about was just how much money was being poured into the XR ecosystem around the world, and it was, yeah, it
It's just
has been.
ongoing. But I think,
Yeah.
but the other thing that was interesting for me in our discussions of this idea of solving, like thinking of
Mhm,
some of the challenges of new ways to solving and new insights into what can be done with these technologies, that I feel
mhm,
like you discussed with me that it's potentially a different kind of approach than other parts of
mhm.
the world so far. And if you can touch on that a bit.
Absolutely, absolutely. So one of the things I would say was very key to us starting out was that, whenever people heard things like virtual reality, they'd be like, oh, gaming, entertainment. And we were like, no, you will understand that there is much more that we can do with this. Anyway, so we were very passionate about helping people understand that there were an almost limitless range of use cases. Like we used to say, you are only limited by your imagination in terms of sort of like what vertical you could apply it to. And when we came to the hackathons, because remember when I was talking about sort of like our three focus areas, that third one where we were always looking for ways in which we could like apply these technologies for the benefit of society. We took that mindset into the hackathons. And so we would say to the
And
hackers,
that being
can you create
education. That's what you're saying here.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we would say, can you create a solution for education or healthcare or tourism, right? Areas where, we knew that there would be some meaningful outcome for everyone. And so we've seen that. And over time, it's very interesting. In 2022, we put out this Africa XR report, which was the first comprehensive sort of like mapping of the ecosystem on the continent. And it's shown what we've been seeing through the years, that sort of like the number one area that people build solutions for, on the continent is education, right? That's the area where people are saying, okay, how can we deploy this? How can we make a change? This is where we see so much potential. And there's definitely been that. I mean, I will say sort of like on the flip side of that is that, you'll see a lot more funding initiatives going into like the creative economy. And so artists can kind of like, step into that space with XR. But then when it just comes to pure building, a lot of it has been education.
Do you have a favorite education example that you can share, or a couple of favorites? I mean, it's one of those, you can't have a favorite child, but it's like,
Yes, I can't. I can't.
is there more than one, that are good?
I mean, I'll talk about a few. So, for example, we run an education initiative called We Are for Schools, where we started going into public schools in Lagos in Nigeria in 2017. And just to give you context about what sort of like environment that would be, the public school system is where the majority of children go, and the classrooms on average in a state like Lagos, you'd have maybe like 80 students, 90 students, but it's like sort of like basic, right? So it's just chairs, tables, and a black or white board. That's it. And one teacher. So as you can imagine, those teachers have just so much work to do. And for us, obviously, the technology is fantastic when you try it out, like everybody's excited. But we were like, what can it do to make a difference so that a child who is in that school system gets the sort of education, right? That is on par. Oh, hey, maybe we'll even surpass like what you would find in our elite schools, right? How do we get all children closer to SDG 4? That was the question for us.
What's SDG 4? Just
And it's the quality education SDG of the United Nations, yeah.
which you're a part of, right?
The
Even,
UN?
yes, aren't you
No, no.
working with them?
Yes, yes. So we did work with UNICEF in 2019 on our VR for Schools initiative, and that was then we partnered with a local school in Lagos, a local public school. We worked with the teachers. We brought them into the lab. We gave them time, experience with technology. Tell us what you think about it. Tell us if you think it can help you, and and they enjoyed it, and they were like, okay, so let's see, can you do a few things for us? So for example, the physical and health education teacher said to us, one of the things I would love to be able to do is take my students, on field trips or visits. We're doing non-communicable diseases, and I'd love for them to go to a hospital and be able to speak to a doctor and to find out more about these diseases and not just read about it in a book. And it's like, okay, so what's an easy way that we can do that for you? And then you're like, okay, well, we'll take a 360 camera, we'll go to a hospital, we'll set the doctor down, we'll report that, and we'll bring the experience back, so so your students can experience that. The math teacher said, I teach my students algebraic expressions, but that's one that's really difficult for them. It's almost like, a lot of people struggle with the abstractness. How can I like bring it home and make it relevant and tangible? And so we, created an experience where like there are all of these dating interactions where you're like leveraging elements of, algebraic expressions to sort of like get through the day. So it was things like that, right? Like being able to co-create that with the teachers. So that's one example. But there are so many kind of like other people who are really doing amazing things. In Ghana, there's Nubian VR who are looking at really exciting ways to teach vocational stuff around electricity and electronics, which is work that I'll be looking out for and trying to get that into secondary schools. In Rwanda, there's an initiative around augmented futures, which was looking at augmented reality to teach children as well in sort of like the junior secondary school years. There's really exciting stuff happening in South Africa in some of the universities and in some school systems. And there's a project I heard about recently where they're looking at a smart classroom where they're leveraging VR headsets in South Africa as well. So, there are a whole bunch of initiatives happening where it's like, rah. But I think one thing where probably, if you are in the space on the continent that you're very keen to see, is to be able to have a rigorous study conducted so that we can actually gather empirical evidence that will allow us to determine the impact on learning outcomes. I mean, I think this is data that would then allow for significant shifts in sort of like policy and spending when it comes to education. And for us, that's a key priority.
Are there people that inspire you beyond even this within the ecosystem that other people know about? Because I know I found you when I asked for speakers for my NYU class, and everyone was like, Judith, you need to get Judith.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I'm endlessly inspired by so many people, but I'll tell you kind of like a little bit about my journey. I started out, as I said, I was a business psychologist. So really, really, I knew nothing. But one thing I did know.
And now you're writing books, you're on all these councils across the world, teaching. It's awesome.
But I was like, I'm gonna do this, and if I'm gonna do this, then let me quickly like learn, like let me find people who can help me out. One of the things I did was like I was looking up people, I was doing all this research. I found Tom Furness online. I was like, oh my goodness, this guy is like the godfather of VR. And so I sent him a message on LinkedIn and he replied. And then he got on a Skype call with like, it was really amazing. I think some people were really kind and generous with their time and all of that when I was getting started. And he got on a Skype call with me. He connected me with the Seattle VR community. That first hackathon that we did way back in 2016, they sent down a whole bunch of leap motions for the teams to use. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh my goodness. So that's definitely someone that it's yeah. I really appreciated like that warmth, that pull in to the space from that. I remember Damon Hernandez.
I loved it. I loved it. And I met
yeah,
both great.
He's phenomenal, right? Like I remember, I was looking for anybody, and the strategy I had at the time was if I wanted to do sort of like VR, XR, I need to connect with big tech because obviously, like for all intents and purposes, right? They were the gatekeepers of the technology at that time. So I was investing a lot in sort of like going to the Bay Area and like connecting with whoever I could. And when I was going to do the first hackathon, I'm just like, right, who's done this? Where's the expertise? And it's like, I got to talk to David. And I remember having coffee with him and it's like Union Square, and he's just, laying it all on me. And actually with him, I tried out the HoloLens for the first time too. Yeah. So a lot of people were like sort of like really kind in terms of just spending time and telling me their stories and how they did it and give me all of that encouragement, which I found, super, super, super impactful. But in terms of kind of like doing the work, I mean, so you know Ingrid, right, from our council at the World Economic Forum. I find the work she does like absolutely,
Well, talk a
absolutely
little bit. I mean,
incredible. Yeah. Yeah,
you
so
you
Ingrid
worked
is,
with her on something as well, right? So why don't you
yes, yes.
discuss that a bit?
Absolutely. So Ingrid is a co-founder of Electric South. They're a nonprofit that's based in South Africa. And over the years, they have been the focal point for artists who want to engage with emerging technologies like XR. So they run this absolutely legendary workshop lab, I'll call it, called New Dimensions. And yeah, just Google New Dimensions Lab and check out whatever you can about it. But they have the most extensive catalog of African created immersive media content in the world. So if you're somebody who's like, oh, I want to check out, the coolest XR from the continent, what have people been doing? Is there a great 360 documentary? You definitely want to call Ingrid or anyone else at Electric Stuff that you can get your hands on and see what they've got on their slate. Absolutely phenomenal work that they do, and we're all the much better that they exist, all the much better for it.
So if you can envision sort of the
Uh-huh.
future of VR, or if you can sort of like look forward,
Hmm.
where do you see it going in? And I know that's impossible, right? Especially with
Yeah, yeah,
but if it's
yeah.
like things go the way that you would like it to go, where does this lead to in 5, 10, 15 years from now?
Oh gosh. Okay, so thank you for kind of like narrowing it down to if it goes the way I want, because yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
If
So to
you're
go
the visionary here, so let's envision.
a while back, I was saying to someone that access to these technologies is like a human right, right? And I know that that might trigger a few people, like, yeah, they are the basic things. But I think that when you think about, the affordances of these technologies, you know, you don't get to keep it away from some people. So the first thing that my future would have is that there is universal access to it. And if in 10 years things go the way I hope that they will go sooner, it will be a very different outlook, and engagement with the technology, because it will mean that when we have the spaces or the forums where people are getting together to deliberate on regulation and governance and all of that related to these technologies, that the representation there looks like the world, right? And then if it does do that, then how much more different will it be? Like, how will the outcomes change? And for me, I don't think that's something that we've particularly seen yet, where we're flipping sort of like, you know an exponential technology on its head, in terms of saying that the shaping of it is now really informed by like every last voice. I don't think the world has ever really allowed that to happen, and I wonder what will come out of it. I mean, it might be slightly chaotic, but it's kind of like chaos that I would look forward to, because it would be a significant shift in human thinking, right? To be able to allow that kind of like change of direction. And I think with that, I'm happy. I'm happy with the direction and the outcome, right? Because then all people can actively engage. But beyond sort of like that engagement in terms of shaping it, I look forward to all of these applications that I think will change everything. I often tell people that there can be a significant shift in terms of achieving SDG 4 in my lifetime if we're able to do the research that we need to around an initiative like VR for schools, and deploy and get it to work. And I mean, I don't think a lot of people have actually sat down to think about what that might mean, but often I tell people that the African continent is the workforce of the future, right? Just looking at sort of like population growth and the average age and all of that. And then imagine kind of like people there educated to like everybody. You know what I mean? Everybody has the chance to be educated to the highest levels. That's that's you know what I mean. No, but I was also going to say sort of like, even, I mean, obviously there's still like children in the schools getting educated. One of the unfortunate statistics associated with Nigeria is that we have the highest number of out of school children in the world for any one country. And for me, I mean, I'm a psychologist, and I have some sense of sort of like some of the constraints, right, that are keeping people out of school in certain areas. and that there are a whole bunch of issues that you have to address to be able to, overcome them. And for me, I'm like, you know what? Imagine a situation where, as you're working to overcome those areas, you can send school to the child wherever the child is. And for me, that's like, imagine, and it's the beauty, right, of the convergence of these exponential technologies, virtual reality, like, artificial general intelligence and all of them, where heck, it might be a situation where I'm able to build something where you have a guide, along with sort of like the learning material virtually, who's supporting the child so that they can learn wherever they are, which really, really upends things. It's like, yeah, you're trying to keep that child sort of like locked in and away from these physical spaces where they'll have all these opportunities. But we want to make sure that whatever space the child is in is also space for growth and learning. So yeah, we'll see.
Well, it ends up being not just like the school of YouTube, but it ends up being like that school of AR and VR, really, for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. It's in the school of everywhere. It's probably how would describe it. So that's if we've gotten universal access. Then it's the school of everywhere because then everybody can engage and do that.
Yeah, I think that we have been talking about this idea of, if all these technologies, if AR, VR, metaverse related technologies, it's so much about, it connects back to sight, right? The focus of Internet
Hmm.
of Things, it connects back to what do you see? And if you don't
Yes.
have the access to be able to see what other people are seeing, then you're at a disadvantage. You need to be able to
Yes.
see, you need to be able to engage with it. It means so much for sort of connecting
Mhm.
everybody, and we need people like you to make sure that we all see it and know that we're missing out if we're not out there sort of supporting the whole world with these technologies. So what can people do if people are as inspired by you as I am? What can they do to help and support your sort of vision come to
Yeah.
life?
Well, I think it depends on what kind of space you're in. So if you're in the XR ecosystem in some way, please consider sort of like partnering with people on the continent to do work. I'm a very big believer in sort of like knowledge sharing and knowledge exchange between, ecosystems around the world. So please work. If there's something of interest, work with somebody there, do a joint project, that sort of thing. Let's figure out how we can collaborate. And there's the work that we do, but I mean, if you want to check out people who are doing interesting XR work on the continent, then please check out the Africa XR report. It's africaxrreport.com online, where you can see some of the other like utterly amazing people doing things around the continent, and get together with them and do something. If you're a funder, please consider investing in some of the work that's being done. And I think particularly if you are someone that's interested in education, because that's where I mean, it's not the only space, but for me personally, it's one area I'm super passionate about, where we do need, a significant amount of funding so we can say, hey, we're locking down a study for 5 years, or 10 years, that sort of thing, to really research this and figure out how best to deploy it locally. So yes, please do that. If you're an educator in some way, if you're deploying sort of like XR in that manner, then reach out and let's talk about what you do and how you do it and how we do what we do, and figure out what we can learn from each other. I mean, there's so many things. If you want to come down and share your expertise, reach out to. There's so much to do. So I think the first thing would be just to say get in touch, and we
And
can
where
take it
should they
from there.
go to get in touch with you?
So you can email me, and it's judith@imisi3d.com. So Judith, I guess it's straightforward, Judith. Imisi3D is IMISI, the number three, and then the letter D.com.
Amazing. Thank you, Judith, for coming to my first internet, senses podcast that I get to host. And I appreciate it because I really, when I said, who would you want on your first podcast? And I was like, boy, I have to have Judith. So I'm so thrilled that you're a part of it. And I can't wait to see all these amazing things that you're doing And hopefully you'll get a lot of people reaching out because of this podcast. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's such a pleasure discussing with you. Always a great conversation with you. So thank you.